Well, hey everybody, Matt Kloskowski here, and welcome to another episode of Your Photo, Our Look from ON1 inside of ON1 Plus. This is a series where I take some of your photos and I edit, and kind of the main reason behind it is I've learned over the years, I have a shooting style. I have a shooting style and I have a genre of photography that I like, but I understand that there's many other shooting styles and there's many other genres of photography, and it's impossible for me to dive into all of them. So I think it's kind of cool for me to take some of your photos and see what we can do with them. So we'll do everything here from portraits to underwater. We're going to do a sky replacement. So let's get started. I really like this photo. This one was, oh, and by the way, guys, I forgot the most important part. I am using, look, ON1 Photo Raw 2019 sneak peek. So I am using the latest and greatest. So we'll dive right in here. Some cool things that we can do, especially here in Develop, when we can start to add layers. So this is I love this photo. I love compositionally. I love the color, and the most important part, I could care less about all of it. I love the expression. You'll hear people say, well, you can use this lens and do this and this sharpening, all this other crap, guys. When it comes down to this and lighting and all that stuff, I mean, lighting is nice. It's a nice added bonus when you have a photo like this, and the lighting is actually really good here. But man, expression wins all. I don't care if you have the best light in the world. The expression takes everything. So, not a whole lot that we have to do with this. My thought process when I see a photo like this is I want to reverse it. I want to take what's a bright background and make it darker, and I want to take what's a darker subject and make it a little bit brighter. All right. So one of the ways that I would do that is I would do that right here inside of Develop. I'm not even really. I'm going to go in here. I'll kind of boost up our exposure enough that I think it starts to brighten them a little bit. But I'm not even really going to do anything else to the photo when it comes to our overall settings here. I'm going to go straight to local, and I'm going to pull the exposure back. I don't know by how much just yet. I'm going to make sure we choose our adjustment brush up here, hit the right bracket key, make it a little bit bigger. Go to my feather setting, crank that up as high as it goes. And then what we're going to do is we would start to paint to negative exposure onto the background. All right. Now, that's not going to be enough. We're going to probably maybe even go a little bit darker, but obviously this stuff is going to be the easy part. So I'm actually going to save it. I'm kind of give me the bad news first kind of guy. So let me get that over with. So rather than kind of do all that, I'm going to work on the harder part, which is going to be inside of here. And we're going to go turn on our perfect brush. And what this is going to do is it's going to let me just kind of outline the subjects without really thinking too much about it. And I'm just going to do one quick pass as I go through here and outline. And as long as I keep the center of that brush kind of over my background, I'll get really good results on that first pass. Now, you have to see what this is doing because there's a lot of behind the scenes going on inside here. So what I would do, come over here to the adjustment layer that it's created. Okay. And while this is a new interface, a lot of these tools are the same, like what I'm about to do here. You go over to the adjustment layer it created, click on the mask, that little square there. That will show you the mask area. And then what I would do is choose view. Now I can get kind of an idea of what this is doing, and it's missing some of the background there, but let's go with it. Let's continue to paint while we're in this mode because we kind of already did our kind of basic outline of the subject. Once I do that, I would go ahead and turn off the perfect brush. Okay, we don't need it at this point anymore. And now I would start to kind of grab all those other areas. What we want is we want that background to be as white as possible, because that means it's going to be affected by this adjustment layer here, which is going to be a darkening layer. So I would go in here and do that, trying to use a bigger brush to do it. And then I would hit the left bracket key, make my brush a little bit smaller, and see if we can go start to clean up some of these little areas here. We're not going to get them all, and I'm not going to worry about them all. But just get enough of it to start just inching in more and more toward our subject. Okay. All right, now let's go ahead and click on view again to turn that off and take a look at what we're working with here. So remember, we're working on this background. As I scroll down, I think that was probably a little bit too dark, so I'd kind of ease up on it a little bit. But I think we did pretty good. You know, if you go toward the top here and you turn that little adjustment layer off and on, you can see what we've done. If you've happened to encroach in any area like we did on his elbow, remember we were painting. All I would do is change from paint in to paint out, hit the left bracket key, make my brush a little bit smaller, and then just kind of zoom in there and paint that out. Okay. I don't know if we went in, looks like we got maybe a little bit on the side of his face, so we could paint that out as well. Kind of do a quick run around, make sure we're looking good, but I think that's doing a really, really good job. So remember, we were trying to darken that background. I think we did a good job. I think a little bit of saturation, there's some color in that background, and I think some saturation could definitely add a little bit of spice to it as well. A little bit of structure will add some kind of just snap and grit to the background. I don't think you want to go too high. I see this a lot, and I think it's overdone. I think just a moderate amount of structure back there. Remember, we're just working on the background. Okay, that's what this layer is targeted to. Now, this interface is a little bit different than you might be used to, but we're on local. This is the local adjustments that we did with the brush. Let's go back to develop, which is now the overall photo. And now this is where I would control overall settings in the photo so we can adjust exposure if we want. What I would say is maybe a little bit more structure inside of here. I think would help. Maybe a little bit more warmth, not too much. Okay. And as I do that, I think, all right, the background's dark. They're looking good, but I'm going to go back over here to local. I'm going to add another layer, and we're going to just do a little bit of brightening on their faces. Not too much, just a little bit. So take our exposure up just a hair. I'm not going to use the perfect brush for this because I'm not going to go all the way to the edges there. And then we're going to make sure our brush is set to paint in because we are brightening. We want to paint in the brightening effect. And I would just go right in there. Okay. You could maybe even paint in a little bit on their clothes. All right. And then we could even add a little bit more structure to that. And I think we could get away with, especially with their faces. You might be thinking, why wouldn't I use portrait on this? This is, you don't use portrait on a 3/4 view body photo. You use portrait on it where the face is the photo. Nobody would ever see the level of detail in the eyes and the teeth, especially, you know, once we're showing this online or printing this, you would never see it. So it's not really a photo that you would use. You would worry about portrait retouching or do anything like that of that nature on it. So I'm just going to use an overall brightening where I just brighten their faces a bit. Okay. All right, you want to see the before and after? All we have to do is hit the / key. So that is before and that is after. Again, before and after. All right, moving on down the line. Let's take a look at another one here. Let's take a look at the underwater photo. Get a lot of questions about underwater photos, and you know, there's not too much different in editing an underwater photo than there is in any other type of photo. So I think, you know, cropping and composition are always going to be important. So I'd probably crop that in, get that down into a lower third down there. Color correction is always something we would do to an underwater photo. So I'd grab the little eyedropper tool here in develop in the basics area. And then just go click on something that is grayish. Okay. You know, I didn't take this photo, so I'm not exactly sure what was grayish, but I kind of know this area over here should probably be fairly neutral. And really, guys, when it comes down to underwater photos and correcting a color cast, they're almost always going to be green. So how do you correct green? You go the opposite way. So green, the opposite of green is going to be a red or magenta. And that's all that little eyedropper did, is this kind of automatically set this. All right, so just adding a little bit of magenta over here. We obviously don't want to add more blue because that's going to give more of a color cast to it. So we might want to warm it up a little bit, but again, not too much there. So I think that's looking pretty good. Let me see. Let's see. Maybe we'll pull back a little bit. I'm also going to experiment with vibrance. Vibrance will keep a little bit of that saturation, but it might take some of that red out, which could be good here, especially over here. Okay, so from there, next thing I would say is I'd grab my brush. You know, to me, it's one of the most important parts about what we do. I'd grab my brush and brightening and darkening. So what do I want to darken? I think I want to darken this. I'd really like our attention to be focused right over here. So I would pull the exposure back. Again, a big feather, and just start to darken everything around here. Okay. I purposely overpaint on everything. And then what I'll do is just hold down the Option or Alt key again with a big brush, and I'll go on the outside edges and I'll kind of chip away and bring it back in like so. And that keeps it that really keeps it from spilling over. I might go in here and add another adjustment layer here again, so I can kind of control the exposure a little bit more. And I'd bring my opacity down to about 50%, and I'll tell you why in a second. And I'd go through here and start darkening areas. And the reason why I'm doing it at a low opacity is because if I find an area that I want to darken a little bit more, I can paint over it again with that brush, and it lets me build it up. And you can even bring that opacity down more, and you'll get more control with it. All right, so go over here. Again, just kind of pull back on some areas. And the more I want to darken an area, the more I would paint over it, and it'll build up with that opacity. That's why I did it on a separate layer, because then it won't affect this at all. But maybe I want to darken this a little bit more too. Okay. And I would add one more layer here, maybe bring my exposure up just a hair and go paint over. I'm going to guess that's an eel. Go paint over here on the eel. And maybe a little bit of structure there. Give it a little bit of snap. Can experiment with the shadows. See what happens if I try to pull some shadow area out there. It's not really doing too much. So I think that's looking pretty good. Let me see here. We can add the appearance of a directional light. There already is some directional light happening in here. You can see from the top right corner. But I can go and add one more adjustment layer here. And this time I would use the adjustable gradient, and then I would use it in the vignette form, not the linear form. Okay, so choose the vignette form. We're going to crank our exposure up, and then I'm just going to click. So you can see it's almost like a spotlight. And I'm just going to kind of mold and craft and directionalize this little spotlight here. Kind of bring it in. And then skim it across the photo a little bit. Pull back on our exposure. I think that might have been too bright. Maybe warm it a little bit. It'll give us a nice little feel there. Something along those lines. And there's honestly not too much I would do else to this photo. You know, we can, rather than, a lot of times I'll finish off by adding a vignette. And we can add a vignette, but rather than do that, I would probably go back to that layer. Remember the layer we did the darkening on, and I used that low opacity brush. So rather than do a vignette, I would just go over here and just kind of darken with the brush some of the corners and bright spots. Get a little bit more control with it than you would have with the vignette. The effect is the same, the result's the same. It's just we're doing it a little bit different way. All right, so backslash key, that's before, and that is after. Let's go back to browse. Speaking of vignettes, I didn't do it here, but I would add a vignette to this to finish it off. So, and I typically don't. I would save everything. I would save everything for effects. Okay, and that's the kind of the new version here. That's one of the things is we have, you know, we're kind of doing our basic stuff in develop, and it really helps you keep focused on that stuff. Effects is now where you would do vignettes and colorizing and black and whites and all those things. So I'd go over to effects, do the old big softy, take our little center point tool, click over our subjects. And then of course I want the big softy bigger, but I don't want it quite as dark as the default does. And that just adds a nice Nice little way to focus in on those guys. So again, that was the before and that is the after. Okay, so moving along here, let's do a let's do a little sky replacement here. And we're going to use some new features. So we're going to go grab our grab our base photo. And before I ever do the replacement, do some base thing, just a little bit of shadows, a little bit of midtones. It's tough because we want to open up shadows, but we don't necessarily want to brighten this foreground too much. So we have to be a little bit careful there. But I think overall tone, color, I think we're pretty well exposed. I think we could take care of this at the end. Let's wait until we get our sky in there before we attack this dark tree on the left-hand side. So what we would do is we're going to head up. So I'm in the develop section, and you're going to notice your layers are right on top of that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go add a layer. And I'm actually going to borrow a sky from another photo that was submitted here. So let's go grab something that's got, there we go. I saw some nice white puffy clouds inside there. So all we have to do is click on your photo. You'll notice this lets you go through folders. You can go through your ON1 extras. Everything's inside of there. Let's go add as a layer. And you're going to see that it pops right up there on top. So now we have two different layers over here. First thing I'm going to do is flip them. Carl's photo is the photo that, and by the way, Ralph, I don't want to take anything away from you. Ralph, you got a great photo. Not too much, open up those shadows a little bit, maybe pulled back on the highlights, and there's not too much I would really change about that. Maybe a little bit pulling back on the haze. I don't want to just use your photo as a sky. I think it's a great photo. There's just not too much I could do for it because it's already a good photo. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drag Carl's photo on top so that we have the photo that has the sky we want to knock out. And as we knock that sky out, we will see the photo that's underneath, which is Ralph's photo. Now, I am going to go into the move tool on Ralph's photo. You'll notice we have a lot more sky inside here. So I am going to go fit. Just click the little kind of four-cornered arrow icon there, which will fill the canvas with that. And kind of move that. But then I am going to kind of stretch it too. I'm going to stretch it because I know that we're going to need a little bit more area out there for the sky. So that should do it. We'll always be able to come back to it if we need to because it's down here on a separate layer. Hence the advantage of doing that. Let's go turn the top layer back on. First thing we need to do is do some masking. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, we're on Carl's layer up at the top here. We are going to click on the little mask icon, which is going to open up the whole masking section here. And then we have our masking brush. And so if you think about what we want to do here, we want to paint out. Hence, it's already set to paint out mode. Let's go crank this up to 100%. And then I am also going to turn on my perfect brush just to help me around the edges. So we'll go over here. We will start painting. I know we're killing an area over here. We will come back to that. So I'll just go through here, through the edges, get that tree. Yeah, you see we brought in a little bit of that mountain, but we can always, we'll save that for last. That's easy to go back in and fix if we need to. So there we go. So we got our other clouds back in. And I said it was easy to go back and fix, but honestly, I gotta work on the trees and everything over there. So we might go back over here to Ralph's layer and go to our move tool. I'm gonna zoom out for a second and then stretch that out a little bit. Like so. Stretch it out just a little bit more, like so. It's a sky. If you're thinking, well, he's enlarging it. It's a sky. You're never going to notice the detail in it. All right, so I think that's looking pretty good from the sky standpoint. Now we have to fix our selection. So let's head back over, click on that layer mask on our main layer here. So what are some things that we can do to fix the selection? Well, first off, let's go to the refine. That was the masking one, and that's going to give us kind of brute force, get the sky into the place where we want. Then we go down here to refine. This is where we want to start to work on that edge a little bit. I'm going to Command or Control plus to zoom in. And you'll notice one of the first problems that we have is we have a fringe that goes along here. So we're not going to use the first tool there, the refine brush. We're actually going to go use the chisel tool. And we're going to take the chisel tool and we're just going to paint along the edge. And that will chisel away, hence the name of the tool, at that little fringe that we have here. Okay, and the more you paint it, the more, every time you go over it, it'll chisel away a little bit more. Not too much to worry about here along the trees. Definitely a little bit there. All right, so now we've got this tree over here. Let's go try to go back here to add. Let's see what happens when we add. All right, because I don't want to chisel away too much. We're going to see what happens when we add. We're going to start to, I can see a little bit of a glow, so I think we're going to have to go back over here to remove and see if we can chisel away at that. And then the other thing that I go to is going to be the blur tool. So whenever I got trees like this, I go in here because the first rule of all sky replacements, folks, is you're going to have to come to grips with it is not leave no branch behind, you know. You are going to start to have to give something up here. So we could probably go over that a little bit more. You know, maybe kind of redo it and not maybe chisel it away so much. I could probably bring some of those branches back, but along the lines of what we did here without spending 10 minutes on this, I think we can get pretty close. And then again, you know, honestly, do you know what I would do with this right over here? I would just keep going in here and let's go to that blur tool. I'd keep going in here and painting over it with blur and maybe a combination of chisel. And even if that didn't do it, come down here to the fix section, just remove it. Like there's no reason to keep that little tree sticking out there for as much problems as it's going to cause us. There's just no reason to keep it. Okay. And then, gosh, I mean, if you think about what we're doing here, since we now have two raw photos on top of each other, working here with layers, what's to stop us from just going back to our regular masking brush and going into paint out mode, right? And just saying, just let me paint this all out. Like, why even keep it here at all? Why worry about this mask and why do anything on there to keep that tree in there? Just paint that whole tree out of there. And I think that would make it the whole process a lot easier. So a big part of this is just, you know, you have to kind of figure out what's worth keeping and what's worth spending time on. Now we got some areas over here. I'm going to go back over here to refine, and I'm going to go over here to that first tool, the refine brush. So remember, paint out. If I paint on this tree and I paint out, we're actually going to start to get rid of the tree. And I don't think that's what we want. So I would undo that. I would go over here to paint in and see if we can bring back. There we go. See how we're bringing the darkness back on that tree there? So that's exactly what we're looking for. Okay. And then here's the kicker. Here's the kind of the advantage of having a layered environment mixed with your raw processing. And that is, we now have a separate layer that contains this foreground. And then we now have a separate layer that contains our sky. So for me, this sky is a little bit too deep and saturated blue. So I would go in here and maybe open up that exposure a little bit and then pull back on the highlights because I don't want to kill the highlights in there. Open up that exposure. You know, you've got all your corrections down here between temperature and tint and the color adjustments and all that stuff that you could go in there and modify, as well as using these layers inside of effects and do the same thing, add filters to it if you needed to change the color. But I think just brightening a little bit just helps take some of that oversaturation out of it. I can go back to the main photo layer, add a little bit of structure, do a little bit of dehaze on there. Okay. And then to finish this all up, I talked about this tree in the beginning. I said, this is what I would attack at the end. I would just head over here to the local section. I would use my adjustable gradient. And then all I'm going to do is click and bring it in from the left-hand side. All right. Now, it's defaulted to negative exposure. Double click that to set it to 0 and bring your shadows up. All right. So that way I can go in here and just work on the shadows in that area. I don't need a lot of detail there. I just don't necessarily need it to be black. Okay. And then, I'm not even saying that, maybe the right thing for this photo is consider a crop. Why not crop in on really what I think a lot of the action in the photo would be. It just depends. The water down there is kind of a nice added touch, so we might have to go a little bit out here on the right-hand side, but we could always go in there and crop that tree out. There's a lot of different ways that we can go with it. So I think overall, nicely captured photo. I think, the sky was good to start with, but I think that was one that could benefit from a little bit of an enhanced sky with a few little white puffy clouds inside of it, as we did here. Plus, I won't lie, it was a good chance to go and demonstrate a new feature inside of 2019, which is having 2 raw photos, and in the raw photo environment, having 2 photos in develop and masking between the 2 without having to jump back and forth to layers. Okay, so guys, that's going to wrap it up for this section. I've got more photos too. We'll make sure we do another video for you. In fact, I've got several more photos that I want to go through in some various degrees of cropping, and I have a couple of different themes that I'll do for your photo art look. But hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll talk to you again real soon.